Most people go their entire lives without encountering a masked serial killer. Sidney Prescott, unfortunately, has encountered numerous. Not just random killers either. We're talking about multiple murder sprees across multiple cities spanning years of her life, all carried out by different psychopaths wearing the same Halloween costume. Ghostface shows up in Sidney's life with the consistency of a seasonal flu. New house, new school, new city, doesn't matter. Eventually the phone rings, someone asks her favorite scary movie, and people start dying. Surviving one horror movie is impressive. Surviving 7 is something else entirely. If you look at Sidney's life, a clear pattern starts to emerge. Every time she tries to move on, every time she thinks the nightmare is finally over, another Ghostface shows up to ruin everything. Which raises an important question. Why does this keep happening to her? More importantly, why does it suck to be born as Sidney Prescott? Today we're breaking down Sidney's life story. From the murder of her mother to the endless parade of Ghostface killers who keep stabbing their way into her personal life, and explain why she might be the unluckiest horror character ever written. When you look at everything she survived, you start to realize something. Sidney Prescott doesn't just live through horror movies, her entire life is one. Sidney's backstory. Before the Ghostface killings, Sidney Prescott was just a normal teenager living in the quiet California town of Woodsboro, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. Unfortunately for Sidney, something did. About a year before the events of Scream, Sidney's life is completely shattered when her mother, Maureen, is brutally murdered. The crime becomes a massive scandal in Woodsboro, turning Sidney's tragedy into the town's favorite piece of gossip. Rumors spread, the media gets involved, and suddenly Sidney isn't just a grieving teenager, she's at the center of a small-town murder mystery. Cotton Weary is eventually arrested and convicted for the murder, which, on paper, should bring some closure to the situation, but emotionally, the damage is done. Sidney is traumatized, her family life is shattered, and her reputation in Woodsboro is permanently tied to one of the town's most disturbing crimes. Before the story really begins, let's start tracking something important: Sidney's therapy bill. We'll start this at a modest $5,000. Don't worry, it's going to get much worse. Chronological suffering timeline. High school turns into a slasher movie. Sidney is just trying to survive high school while dealing with the trauma of her mother's murder. Unfortunately, Woodsboro High is about to become the least safe school imaginable. It all starts when 2 local teenagers are brutally murdered, sending shockwaves through the small town. Suddenly, everyone is on edge, rumors start spreading, and a masked killer begins terrorizing Sidney directly. The killer starts calling her house, making it very clear that Sidney is the center of this entire nightmare. Things get worse when suspicion starts falling on the people closest to her, including her boyfriend, Billy Loomis, who doesn't help his case by climbing through Sidney's bedroom window in the middle of the night. The real nightmare comes at the end of the killing spree when Sidney finally learns the truth. The murders weren't the work of one deranged killer, but 2. Billy Loomis and his best friend, Stu Macher. Sidney's own boyfriend has been orchestrating the murder spree the entire time, manipulating her, stalking her, and killing people she knows, all while pretending to care about her. If that revelation isn't bad enough, Billy explains his motive. He blames Sidney's mother, Maureen, for having an affair with his father, which broke up his family. In Billy's mind, the logical solution to that problem is to go on a killing spree and psychologically torture Maureen's daughter. Instead of finishing high school worrying about finals or prom, Sidney spends her night fighting off 2 knife-wielding murderers in a house full of terrified teenagers. Not exactly the senior year experience most people have in mind. It's time for our first major update. Sidney's therapy bill. We're looking at roughly $15,000. College somehow gets worse. After surviving the Woodsboro massacre, Sidney does the most reasonable thing imaginable. She leaves town and starts over somewhere new. She enrolls in college, hoping to finally move on from the trauma that turned her entire senior year into a slasher movie. For a little while, it almost works. Sidney makes new friends, joins the theater program, and starts dating someone new, Derek Feldman. For the first time since the original murders, it looks like she might get a chance at a normal life. Unfortunately, Sidney doesn't live in a world where normal life lasts very long. Her story has become national news, and Hollywood wastes no time turning the murders into a movie called Stab. Sidney's trauma is now playing in theaters for entertainment. Almost immediately after Stab premieres, the murders begin again. Ghostface appears, and just like before, the killings start getting closer to Sidney. Friends, classmates, and people connected to the original murders begin turning up dead. And once again, Sidney finds herself trapped in the middle of a growing murder spree. Things reach their most brutal moment near the end of the killing spree when Sidney finds Derek tied to a stage prop inside the campus theater. At first, it looks like he might be involved in the murders, but before Sidney can even process what's happening, Ghostface steps out and shoots him, killing him right in front of her. The nightmare isn't finished yet because the mastermind behind the entire killing spree turns out to be Nancy Loomis, the mother of Billy Loomis, the serial killer boyfriend who tried to kill her in the first place. The Ghostface situation is apparently a multi-generational family revenge saga. It's time for another update. Sidney's therapy bill, now up to approximately $25,000. Hollywood decides to kill you again. After surviving 2 Ghostface killing sprees, Sidney decides the best strategy is to remove herself from society. She isolates herself in a remote house, keeps her location private, and works a crisis hotline job under a different identity. This seems like a reasonable life choice after everything she's been through. However, Ghostface apparently has excellent investigative skills. This time, the murders begin in Hollywood, where a new installment of the Stab series is being filmed. The cast and crew start getting killed one by one. Sidney's traumatic life story is now not only a horror movie franchise, but also the setting for yet another murder spree. Eventually, Sidney is pulled back into the chaos, where she finds herself face to face with Ghostface. This time, the killer reveal takes things to a completely new level of personal. The mastermind behind the murders turns out to be Roman Bridger, the director of the Stab film and Sidney's secret half-brother. Roman reveals that years earlier, he tracked down their mother, Sidney Prescott, after discovering she had abandoned him as a child. When she rejected him again, Roman became obsessed with revenge. According to him, he was the one who showed Billy Loomis footage of Maureen's affair, which helped set the events of the first Woodsboro murders into motion. The entire saga that has been ruining Sidney's life for years can now be traced back to her long-lost brother manipulating a high school student into becoming a serial killer. So naturally, it's time for another update. Sidney's therapy bill. We've now hit at least $40,000. Discovering your secret half-brother has been orchestrating events behind the scenes of multiple murder sprees is the kind of family drama that therapy is designed for. Unbelievably, Sidney's life is still not done getting worse. Your cousin tries to murder you for fame. Years pass without another massacre, and Sidney writes a self-help book about surviving trauma and reclaiming your life. Which is honestly impressive considering her life story reads less like a memoir and more like a true crime documentary that never ends. The book tour brings Sidney right back to the place she probably should never visit again, Woodsboro. Immediately after she returns, the murders start. Ghostface appears, a new group of teenagers becomes the center of the chaos, and Sidney finds herself pulled into yet another killing spree. The pattern is becoming painfully obvious. If Sidney Prescott is in town, Ghostface is not far behind. The twist comes when the killer is revealed. The person behind the mask is Jill Roberts, Sidney's own cousin. Jill explains that she doesn't want to live in the shadow of Sidney's survival story. She wants the fame that comes with it. Her plan is to recreate the Woodsboro massacre, murder all her friends, frame someone else for the crimes, and emerge as the sole survivor, the new Sidney Prescott for the social media age. Discovering that your own cousin tried to murder you for internet fame is definitely the kind of experience that requires a few extra therapy sessions, so time for another update. Sidney's therapy bill, now up to $60,000 or more. You can't even retire without Ghostface. Showing up, Sidney eventually does what any reasonable person would do after all that trauma. She steps away from Woodsboro, starts a family, and tries to live a normal life. For a while, it works. But then, the killings start again. A new masked attacker targets a teenager named Tara Carpenter, kicking off another wave of murders tied directly to the legacy of the original Woodsboro massacre. As the killings escalate, Sidney is once again pulled back into the chaos to help stop the killers. The people behind the mask are revealed to be Richie Kirsch and Amber Freeman, two obsessive fans of the Stab movies who believe the franchise has gone downhill. Their solution? Commit a new series of murders so Hollywood will have better material for the next movie. Because apparently the best way to improve a horror franchise is to become part of one. Not long after that, the violence escalates again. This time, the surviving characters from the previous massacre move to New York City, hoping to escape the Ghostface legacy. Ghostface follows them there, and the killings grow bigger and more public, turning crowded subway trains and city streets into the setting for yet another brutal murder spree. Eventually, the truth comes out. The killers are the family members of Richie Kirsch, including his father, Detective Wayne Bailey, along with his children Quinn and Ethan. Their entire plan is revenge for Richie's death. Just when it seems like the nightmare might finally be over, Ghostface proves he still isn't done with Sidney Prescott. This time, the attacks hit even closer to home. The new killings begin with an escaped psychiatric patient named Carl Gibbs appearing to take on the Ghostface identity, but the situation quickly becomes more complicated. It's revealed that the conspiracy behind the murders involves multiple people manipulating events from behind the scenes, including Marco, an employee at the psychiatric facility, and Jessica, Sidney's neighbor who has secretly become obsessed with her survival story. Jessica idolizes Sidney's reputation as the ultimate survivor and believes the only way to prove herself is to recreate the kind of massacre Sidney survived so many times before. After everything Sidney has endured, multiple murder sprees across different cities, faced off against an entire lineup of Ghostface killers, and repeatedly watched people around her become targets simply because they were connected to her, therapy probably becomes less of an occasional appointment and more of a permanent weekly obligation. Which means it's time for one last update. Sidney's therapy bill. We must be well past $100,000. Why Sidney is the unluckiest horror character ever. When you step back and look at the full timeline of Sidney Prescott's life, one thing becomes very clear. This woman cannot catch a break. Most people go their entire lives without encountering a serial killer. Sidney has spent most of hers fighting them off. Other iconic horror characters like Laurie Strode and Nancy Thompson have faced terrifying killers, but their stories usually revolve around one main villain. Sidney doesn't have that luxury. She gets new serial killers every few years. While Sidney may be one of the toughest survivors in horror history, her life is also one of the most miserable. When you look at everything she's endured, the conclusion is obvious. It really, really sucks to be born as Sidney Prescott. At this point, the only safe place for her is probably outer space. Honestly, even then, I wouldn't be surprised if someone in a Ghostface mask eventually shows up on the spaceship. Is Sidney Prescott the unluckiest horror character ever, or is there another horror survivor who had it worse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the unbelievably chaotic life of Sidney Prescott, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Shriek Geek, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives and movie analysis. Thanks for watching, and remember, if a mysterious voice ever calls your phone asking about your favorite scary movie, hang up immediately.